Beautiful. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Offen. I am the Data and Insights Lead at Unlocked and our sister company, Loadout. I'm going to be talking to you today about what a Counter-Strike fan looks like. Obviously, we chose this topic because there's the Counter-Strike Major happening just down the street. So we thought it was an apt time to talk through it. But first, I'll introduce who Loadout are. Loadout are the data subsidiary of Unlocked, which is one of the largest esports and gaming agencies in Europe. We produce data that Unlocked use to help us understand and better contextualize the esports space. We produce a large data package, a large data set with GWI. It's powered by GWI, meaning we've got over 100,000 data points on a range of different gamers. We produce data in 16 different markets with a sample of 1,000 in each of those markets. So we've got a huge number of gamers that we know about and a huge amount of data on each of those gamers. So I'm going to be talking today about Counter-Strike and the Counter-Strike audience, but what I want to emphasize at the start of this presentation is that we've got data on so much, and this is just a small snapshot of that audience that we were able to profile. So to kick off, I just want to contextualize the wider esports scene as we see it as a data company, and contextualize what we're going to be measuring Counter-Strike fans against and who we're talking about when we talk about esports. First off, esports awareness globally currently stands at around 60%. So 59% of the global online 16 to 64 population is aware of esports as a concept. That doesn't mean they watch esports, it doesn't mean they enjoy it, it doesn't mean they really know what it is beyond the bare awareness of it conceptually, but that's a pretty large figure considering where esports was a couple of years ago. This is if you were to segment that population of 16 to 64 online people and how they fit within the esports fandom. So you've got around 59% of people who are either unaware or uninterested in esports. So they either don't know what it is or they're aware of what it is, but they don't really care for it as a concept. Then we have that 19% of the population who are casual fans. These are people who watch esports very occasionally, less than fortnightly, or they hold low interest in it as a concept. And then we move up into esports fans and esports obsessives, who are the group that we're really going to focus on to measure Counter-Strike fans against. And these are people who are watching esports actively, or in the case of esports obsessives, who are a subset of esports fans, people who care about esports. So many of the people here will be counted as esports obsessives. The people who watch esports as one of their main media things. Esports obsessives can surprise us quite a lot. I think it's important to say at the top of this. I think a lot of people here will feel that they have an intuitive understanding of what an esports obsessive looks like, but that often can't be the case. And esports obsessives are people that we don't necessarily always understand without using data like our own to build a clearer picture of what they look like. This is a basic profile of an esports obsessive. Obviously, we've got a wide array of different information about them, but this will gel with what you've heard previously in talks. The average age of an esports obsessive is about 33 versus the average age of an overall online 64 of about 40. They're 63% male, which might be a lower number than some people are expecting, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that gender split later on. Obviously, there are some games which are much more even in terms of gender splits, and some games which are very firmly male. You're allowed to guess on which one that might be. 51% of them are in the top third of household income, so esports fans tend to be richer than average, but they're not necessarily super rich. And they tend to, for example, follow the latest tech trends and news overall. 62% of them do that. That's about a third of the overall sample. 31% of them buy premium products, and about 40% are ambitious. As I've said before, we've got over 100,000 data points about each of our respondents, so I could build a slide that is literally overwhelming with a little bit of information, but these are just a snapshot of what esports fans overall look like. Here's a view of the most important titles in esports. Call of Duty comes out as top as the one that's watched the most by esports obsessives, which I think shows the wide different array of what esports obsessives can look like. Obviously, we all in this room here know that Call of Duty is not the world's largest esports title, but it does demonstrate here that there are a number of people who hold a more casual interest in esports and will watch titles maybe on a more casual clips-based basis on sites like YouTube and TikTok, rather than directly tuning into every single tournament. The game we're talking about here mainly today, Counter-Strike, comes in about 8% of esports obsessives watch it as their main title, although many more people will watch it as a subsidiary title next to their main title as well. The game that me and Darren first met in Dota 2 is there right at the bottom, just 2%. What makes Counter-Strike fans different then to overall esports fans? The first thing I want to talk about is their passion for the game. 56% of Counter-Strike primary watchers tune into every or most tournament they can. That's a really, really high number. Most Counter-Strike fans are therefore watching every single tournament. If someone counts themselves as a Counter-Strike fan, they are someone who is going to be tuning in, rain nor shine, to every single tournament. They'll be watching the tournament that's going on at the moment. They'll be watching small qualifiers. They'll be watching events that you probably haven't even heard of because they care that much about the game in which they're involved. If you were to compare that to a couple of other sports, compared to Fortnite and League of Legends, you'll notice that's about 10% higher. Counter-Strike fans, therefore, are much, much more likely to be watching every tournament in the game than Fortnite fans, who tend to be a little bit more casual, and League of Legends fans, who are also a little bit more casual. It also compares directly with Valorant, which I suppose is Counter-Strike's most the biggest competitor in the space. Is a very similar shooting-based game where the numbers are pretty much the same. Valorant is also a newer game, it's worth remembering, so the fan base is not as developed as the Counter-Strike fan base. So the Counter-Strike fan base is likely to be broader and include people who might have lapsed out of it as they've grown older, whereas the Valorant fan base is much more passionate as it's a little bit newer. That means that the fact that Counter-Strike is still up there with Valorant, I think, is particularly notable. I would say when we're looking at Counter-Strike fans as a group to profile, it's important to mention that they hold a little bit of what I would describe as an old school sensibility. That doesn't mean they're necessarily old school people, but I think they're the closest out of all of the esports titles we're able to profile as looking what people would necessarily expect when they expect an esports obsessive. They're what, and over the next couple of slides I gather you'll understand what I mean, but they tend to be a little bit more typical of esports fans. And the main way that that's typical is in the gender dynamics. 90%, which is a very high figure when you're looking at survey-based data, of Counter-Strike fans are men. That's leaving only 10% are women. That compares quite strongly to a lot of other titles we profile. A title like Fortnite is pretty close to being 50-50 male and female. Dota's, I think, about 75-25. Valorant's a little bit closer to this, maybe at the 80% mark. And stuff like Call of Duty and FIFA is also in that kind of 50% mark. So Counter-Strike fans really are kind of much more of that group that we imagine. They also tend to be a little bit younger than average when compared to esports fans, at 31 on average. Obviously, Fortnite is one of the lowest ones there at about 26, but Counter-Strike is a younger esport than you might expect. It's not all old people who've been playing since 1996. There are younger fans there as well. They tend to be a little bit richer than average as well. So if you're brands, we speak to brands trying to get them involved in Counter-Strike all the time, and brands tend to be a little bit reticent about it because it involves guns. And that's not something that people like to associate themselves with. But Counter-Strike fans do tend to be richer than average. 60% of them are in the top third of household incomes. So they're twice as likely to be affluent and therefore have money to spend on things. This is how we might profile them attitudinally. You can see some slight differences there against the total esports fan base. So they're slightly more likely to be social. They're slightly more likely to be ambitious, but they're less likely to be brand loyal, adventurous, and creative, which I think speaks to that old school sensibility. Counter-Strike fans are hard to impress, but when they are impressed by you, they will like you quite a lot, and they tend to be interested in brands that allow them to further their own personal growth. So brands that will maybe help them in the brands like betting brands or crypto brands that will help them grow as financial people. Rather than more kind of creative brands like Displate, for example, that will allow them to show elements of themselves. In terms of their personal interests, they're much more likely than the average esports fans to be interested in technology, films, investments, economy, finance, and playing sport. So they are that kind of quite male focus of people interested in that personal improvement. One of the areas they massively under-index in, for example, is music. Counter-Strike fans are much less likely to be interested in music overall than other esports fans who tend to be interested in that as a space overall. Sports crossover, we're very near Wembley, which is obviously one of the biggest sports venues in the UK, and Counter-Strike fans tend to be really, really interested in sport. And I bring this up every single presentation I do. A lot of people tend to sequester esports fans away from sports fans, but we know from our data that there is a huge amount of crossover when it comes to esports fans and sports fans. And 66% of Counter-Strike fans are interested in football. That compares to 26% of internet users overall. So Counter-Strike fans are much, much more likely to be interested in football. So if you're trying to reach them, you can often use the similar ways of doing it as you would reach football fans. They're not a different breed of person. They are, in fact, the same type of person who is interested in football. Neymar there is obviously a good example. He's a Counter-Strike player himself, but a lot of these figures will come from Brazil. The data we have here is for Europe, North America, Brazil, and a little bit of Eastern Europe. So a large portion of this fan base is going to be Brazilian. And Brazilian people, this figure's about 95%. So in the Brazil, the Venn diagram of football fans and esports fans is pretty much a complete circle, although obviously the Counter-Strike circle is a little bit smaller. So it is worth mentioning that they are very much similar people. It's also worth mentioning that Counter-Strike isn't just a game to these people. I think a lot of times when I've dealt with brands that aren't endemic to esports, they tend to think of all esports fans as esports players as well. But a large portion of Counter-Strike fans actually prefer watching esports to playing esports. That's about 55%, and that's slightly higher than the overall average of esports fans overall. So a lot of people who watch Counter-Strike religiously might in fact be lapsed players or people who never actually played Counter-Strike at all in the first place. And we do actually see a large number of people who don't even play Counter-Strike at all, which is quite relevant that Counter-Strike is now therefore much more of a watcher's medium than it is a player's medium, which I think is really important to note. When we look at Counter-Strike viewers overall, quite a few of them watch for entertainment as opposed to watching to improve, which gels obviously with that previous slide. When people are tuning into a Counter-Strike broadcast, they obviously want some element of that technical gameplay, shown on the right there, 60% of them preferring that in their broadcasts, but quite a few of them don't want it to be completely technical. They're not interested in just hearing about the tips on how to improve at the game, how to improve its shooting and so on and so forth. They are largely interested in being entertained and while they learn, and I think that's really important when you're looking at those broadcasts. It's also notable, I've not included the averages here for total esports, that these are a little bit more extreme. Dota tends to be a little bit more people wanting to watch to improve. The same is true of League of Legends. Actually, no, League of Legends is more entertainment, but overall, these numbers do differ from game to game. In terms of team support, Counter-Strike fans tend to be very passionate about the teams they support. This is especially true in South America, especially Brazil, where people are incredibly passionate about the teams they support. But overall, 57% of Counter-Strike fans support a single team, 23% support multiple teams, meaning overall 80% of people support teams within Counter-Strikes. Maybe they'll support teams from different regions, or they'll have teams that they're different interested in. I think a lot of time when people talk about Counter-Strike fans or fans of any esports team, esport game, they tend to assume that people will be supporting the players, not necessarily the team. We have a Q&A with Get Right later, and I think a lot of people might have assumed that when he retired from esports, Ninjas and Pajamas will have therefore seen a massive decrease in the number of their fans. But what I think this data shows is that people overall tend to support the team for their brand, they tend to support the team for their success, not for the people who play for that team. People won't therefore always bounce from team to team as players move, they will necessarily stick with teams. So teams are a really important currency within Counter-Strike, as they are within esports overall, but these numbers are a little bit more intensive within Counter-Strike. These are the teams that are the most supported. You can see Furia very, very strongly at the top there. As I said earlier, Brazil is a massive market for Counter-Strike and is also the most passionate market when it comes to team support. So Brazilian teams like Furia, MBR and Imperial are always going to be at the top. Team Liquid is heavily supported in Counter-Strike as well, as is G2, Loud, FaZe, Na'Vi and Cloud9. But there are a wide array of different teams supported. I think we personally cover over 100 different teams. Not all of those will obviously compete within Counter-Strike, and there is a relatively flat numbers past this graph here, showing that there is a range of different teams supported within Counter-Strike overall. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about Counter-Strike being brand friendly. As I said earlier, a lot of brands are reticent to move into the Counter-Strike space, but actually in terms of its comparison to other esports, Counter-Strike is one of the most brand-friendly esports overall. While Counter-Strike fans may be less likely to be brand loyal, they are very enthusiastic about brands moving into the game that they love and therefore supporting it. It's therefore a really good space for brands to get involved in, as they will bring passionate fans who are interested in them overall and interested in people who get involved. 80% of primary Counter-Strike watchers get a positive image of brands involved in esports, which compares to 75% of esports fans overall. I will say these numbers are always high for more passionate esports fans, so 75% is already a very large figure for esports fans overall, but an increase to 80% shows that Counter-Strike is a very fertile space for brand involvement. What I'll also say is that this 80% number drastically increases as we build into more hardcore fans. So it's already pretty high overall at 80% for primary Counter-Strike watchers. But as we build into primary Counter-Strike watchers who watch every single day, or watch every single tournament, or say that they're massively passionate about esports, this number will increase up to maybe even highs of 95%. So people are always passionate about the brands they get involved in because they see it as their space, and a brand who gets involved is therefore supporting their space. These are the brand types that people are interested in getting involved. Obviously tech and gaming tech and devices is at the top one. People like to see it when brands like Nvidia or Alienware get involved in their space because they're seen as endemic. But it's not just endemics. Non-gaming tech and devices, people are really passionate about that involvement. Cryptocurrency is a big one for Counter-Strike, especially, as I said earlier, they are interested in investments, they're interested in ambition, they're interested in personal growth, and crypto tends to gel with that fairly well. Crypto can be quite unpopular amongst the peripheries of esports, but in Counter-Strike it is actually relatively popular, going from 34% of people wanting to see it up from 22%, so that's a big increase. Telecoms is big, betting and gambling is really big, but other things like clothes, restaurants, self-care, automotive or retail are less important in Counter-Strike overall. And I've just got a side stat there that 70% of Counter-Strike fans have built their own PCs. We all know they're techie, so they are definitely fertile ground for tech brands as well. Here's a final stat. 91% of Counter-Strike fans, Counter-Strike watchers are likely to purchase merch made by an esports teams as well. So if you want to get your brand on a Counter-Strike team shirt, it's a really good way of doing it because people want to get involved in the teams that they support overall. That's, I think, everything I was going to run through. Thanks for listening. Here is my email if you want to get in contact, and my boss's email, Berger. If you want to talk to me today, we are the tallest people here, so you'll be able to spot us at any point. So come and say hello. I can talk about a range of different data and how I might be able to help you. I think I've got about a minute for questions if anyone wants to ask anything. Other than that, that's...
We can maybe take one, I reckon.
Yeah, if anyone's got a question, I'm happy to answer now. Otherwise, we can leave it there.
We're good?
No? Okay, well, we'll leave it there then. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.